The prairie night stretched wide and endless, a hush broken only by the hum of crickets and the faint wail of coyotes carried on the wind. In that vastness, a figure stumbled through the tall grass, bare feet cut by stones, breath ragged with fear. Wyan, 30 winters to her life, ran with the urgency of one who had severed every tether behind her. She did not look back, though the echo of her people's shouts clung to her ears. The moon glimmered like a silver blade above, and then the world narrowed to a single strike, the whistle of a bowstring, the hot bite of an arrow tearing into her shoulder. She fell hard, grass and earth rushing up to meet her. For a moment, the night grew blurred and soundless, her heart thrumming louder than the chase. She pressed trembling fingers against the wound, feeling blood seep through. The cries of pursuit grew fainter until only silence remained. But silence was no comfort. She was alone, pierced and fading. Hoofbeats emerged from a stillness, steady and deliberate. Wyan's eyelids fluttered as a dark figure on horseback broke the horizon, lantern glow catching on dust and leather. The rider swung down with a grace born of long practice. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his coat worn to thread, his eyes the color of storm clouds gathering. Without a word, he knelt beside her. The man's name was Silas Boone. At 35, he carried himself with the quiet of someone long familiar with hardship. His hands were roughened by rope and reins, yet when they touched her skin, they were careful, deliberate. He broke the arrow's shaft with swift precision, bound the wound with a strip torn from his own shirt. His movements were efficient, but his silence was what struck deepest. He asked nothing, demanded no explanation. Only his gaze met hers for an instant, steady and unjudging, before he lifted her in his arms. Wyan felt the heat of his chest against her cheek, the steady rhythm of his breath as he carried her through the night. She did not resist. Her world was already too fractured, too heavy to carry alone. The creak of saddle leather and the whisper of grass marked their journey until a small line shack came into view, its shape barely visible beneath cottonwoods swaying in the breeze. Inside, the single room was sparse, a cot, a chair, a lantern that cast trembling shadows against the walls. Silas laid her down gently, covering her with an old blanket that smelled faintly of cedar smoke. He stoked the fire, the crackle filling the silence between them, and set beans to cook in a tin pot. His back was to her as he moved, his hat resting on the table, never near the bed. Every gesture spoke of boundaries held with respect. Wyan drifted in and out of half-consciousness, yet she noticed details, the calluses that lined his palms, the scar at his temple, the way his shoulders sagged not with cruelty, but with weariness. He spoke little, only soft murmurs when tightening her bandage. Words meant more for reassurance than reply. In her delirium, she whispered fragments of memory, broken pieces of the wound that went deeper than the arrow. He did not question her. He only listened. Days passed in the rhythm of firelight and silence. She healed slowly, her strength returning one breath at a time. Silas made no attempt to pry into her past. Instead, he kept the world steady around her, riding into town for supplies, returning without fanfare. Yet when he came back, his silence held a new heaviness. Wyan saw it in the tautness of his jaw, the way he set his rifle within easy reach. Word had spread. In town, voices whispered. Boone had taken in a Lakota woman. In saloons, the whispers turned sharp, laced with laughter and contempt. They spat at his boots, called him a fool, muttered that no good could come of it. He bore it quietly, but the weight of their scorn followed him back across the prairie. Wyan sensed it without being told. One evening, as he set bread on the table, she caught the exhaustion in his eyes, the cost he paid for her silence, her shelter. Shame burned through her, but when she tried to speak, his look stilled her. "Rest," he said simply, the first word carrying more than its syllable. That night, unable to sleep, she rose carefully. Lantern light flickered across the room, and she saw him slumped in the chair, arms folded, chin resting on his chest. He had chosen discomfort so she might rest without fear. His revolver sat on the table, untouched, though his hand hovered near it even in sleep, as if protecting her even in dreams. Wyan studied him then, not as savior or stranger, but as a man whose strength was made of patience, whose scars were hidden in silence. For the first time since the arrow struck, her breath did not come in ragged gasps. She lay back against the cot, her body still weak, but her heart strangely steadier, and listened to the rhythm of his breathing as though it were a lullaby offered freely by the night. Outside, the prairie stretched on in shadow and wind, the threats of the world unbroken. Yet in that small shack, with a man who asked for nothing and gave what little he had, Wyan felt the faintest flicker of something she had long believed lost: safety. The fire snapped once, embers glowing red against the dark, and with that sound she allowed herself at last to sleep. The days turned to a fragile rhythm of quiet labor. Wyan's wound closed beneath layers of careful bandage, though the scar beneath throbbed when the night winds grew cold. She began to move with more strength, her steps lighter, her eyes steadying in the firelight. She gathered wood in the mornings, humming low songs under her breath, the sound carrying like smoke across the prairie. Silas, never one to disturb silence, let her voice fill the air without comment, though he paused sometimes in his work, listening as though the tune carved a doorway into something he had long forgotten. He taught her small things without words: how to calm a restless horse by resting a hand firm on the muzzle, how to mend worn tack with thread that refused to break, how to tell when weather was turning, simply by watching the restless circling of hawks above. These gestures shaped their days, neither of them asking more than the other could give. In the quiet spaces between, an understanding took root, unspoken, but alive. Yet the world beyond the shack was restless. The prairie was not an empty place. It carried rumors like dust on the wind. Men in town had grown restless with their own talk, whispers sharpened into threats. They said Boone had taken in a woman who did not belong, that he had forsaken his kind, that his shack had become a hiding place for shame. In the corners of saloons, fueled by whiskey and fear, they planned to remind him where the lines were drawn. The night came sudden. Wyan noticed it first, the faint orange glow of torches across the horizon, flickering against the dark like sparks caught in wind. She froze at the window, heart hammering. Silas had already risen, rifle in hand, his movements calm, deliberate. He stepped outside, lantern glow at his back, the tall figure of a man who had no intention of bending. The riders came in a ragged line, faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats, voices thick with drink and malice. They stopped short of the shack, their horses snorting clouds into the chill air. One spat into the dirt. Another called out, voice sharp with contempt, "You keepin' her here, Boone? Thought you'd lost your sense, but this is filth." Silas's rifle lay steady in his arms, but his voice was even, low as thunder rolling far off. "There's no fight here worth spilling blood. Ride home." Laughter broke out among them, but it carried no mirth, only cruelty. A man raised his gun, waving it as though daring Boone to flinch. The words cut sharper than the steel. "She's no place in this land. Step aside, or we'll put her where she belongs." Before Silas could speak again, Wyan stepped into the doorway. The bandage still wrapped her arm, her body not fully healed, but her gaze burned with quiet fire. She said nothing. The silence itself was defiance. The riders faltered. Their jeers cracked, thinned. In the lamplight, they saw not a broken fugitive, but a woman standing tall beside the man who shielded her. Her stillness unsettled them more than any threat of bullets. She did not cower. She did not bow. She simply existed with dignity unshaken. For a long breath, tension hung heavy. Then, as if the prairie itself refused to grant them courage, the men muttered curses, spat again, and tugged their horses back toward town. Their torches dwindled into the night until only darkness remained. The silence afterward weighed heavier than the confrontation. Silas lowered his rifle, but did not move from the doorway until the last glow faded. When he finally turned, Wyan reached out and touched his arm. It was a small gesture, almost nothing, but it steadied him, and it bound them more than words ever could. Inside, the fire burned low, shadows stretching across the walls. Silas knelt to change her bandage, his fingers brushing her skin with reverence, not ownership. She did not pull away. For the first time, her voice rose above a whisper, strong and steady. Wyan. She gave her name in full, as if offering the only gift she still possessed. Boone nodded once, quiet acknowledgement, as though he had known it all along. Dawn arrived like a benediction, gold spilling across the prairie. Wyan mounted Silas's horse despite the ache in her shoulder, her back straight. They rode past the fields and the town that had whispered against them. Faces turned to watch, but no voices rose. Silence held, a silence of uneasy awe, of grudging respect. She did not lower her eyes. He did not slow his stride. The world had not forgiven them, nor would it ever fully. But in their refusal to bow, they claimed back a measure of dignity stolen from them both. The prairie stretched open before them, vast and uncertain, but no longer a place of exile. Somewhere in that boundless horizon lay the beginning of something neither could yet name.